The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my pleasure tonight again to rise in this House as the member of Calgary Centre and speak for perhaps the last time in this Parliament. If we hear what the government is saying correctly, that they're probably going to go to the polls at the end of the summer, but that's for another night. I'd like to speak tonight about the Bill C-12, an act respecting transparency and accountability in Canada's efforts to achieve the zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. Now, I remember when this bill first came before Parliament, and we did our jobs as parliamentarians. We read this bill, we looked at this bill, and a lot of us supported this bill because of what it represented. But we did our job as opposition parliamentarians, not just as parliamentarians on the government side. And we looked at it and we said, we've got to pick our spots here about what we criticize, what we work with the government on, and how we move these advances forward. So when this bill was introduced, I looked at its words and what it seemed to indicate as its intent: to hold governments accountable for reaching assigned climate change targets. All things considered, how could I not support government accountability? Frankly, it's the absolute greatest failure of this government for the past 6 years. Accountability, not a word that seems to be understood by this weak government. Let's just talk about accountability for this debate on the environment. 6 years in government. 6 increases in greenhouse gas emissions. More and more failed experiments by misguided interventions. And I note the excess spending in the department and in contracts with so many self-interested non-governmental organizations. Billions of excess spending going out the door to unaccountable, connected organizations, accomplishing nothing, but being very well paid in the process. And let's look at another example of virtue over objectives and results. Let's talk about 2 billion trees. How long ago did this government promise 2 billion trees? And this year, it's actually saying, okay, this year we'll actually plant 30 million trees. Well, pretty good. If you think about how many trees Canada actually has, the hundreds of billions of trees, this is a very small measurement, and it's accomplishing next to nothing. This is something that's more virtue over results. We actually need some results on the environment, Madam Speaker, and we need to get there as quickly as possible with some real programs. So at first reading, I stood up and I supported this bill, an accountability mechanism for a misleading, unaccomplished government. Well, the veil came off that pretty quickly. This bill allows the Minister of the Environment to appoint representatives to a net zero advisory board. 14 representatives that he's already appointed prior to this legislation even being passed by this House. And it still has another House to go. So he's already got his people all picked out and put there. But it's also quite a power amassment by this Minister of the Environment. And let's look at what he's done with his last power grab under the Impact Assessment Act, where effectively he is the decider of every project that happens in Canada right now, whether or not it's provincial or federal jurisdiction. And this is something that's continuous, very clear with this minister, is that he's trying to get more and more decision makers involved with his department and him making all the decisions for government unilaterally. This is not government the way Canada has been governed. So this board gets constituted before the legislation even exists. It's a good thing we took a good look at who's on this board. And I'll just go through one of the people, and I'll fully confess I know 2 of the members on the board. I've worked with them before, and they're actually pretty good members. But 2 out of 14 I don't think are necessarily going to be holding the boat. But there are some that seem like they're quite obstructionist, if you will, and the result's going to speak for itself at some point in time here when the board comes to a conflict. But the Executive Director, Catherine Abreu, of the Climate Action Network, is one of the appointees. Now, what's her skill? She's an award-winning campaigner. Fantastic. Got a campaigner on a government-appointed board now. Ms. Abreu believes we need to manage the swift decline of Canada's oil and gas industry. Great. Canada's biggest industry, Canada's biggest contributor to taxes, Canada's biggest employer. We're just going to manage the swift decline of that rather than work with the industry to find out how we actually reduce carbon emissions. Good move. What is Climate Action Network, this organization? It's a coalition of more than 100 organizations, including, of course, Clean Energy Canada, but all these others that seem to collect around, and for some reason they need to fund an organization that oversees them, and yet who are they funded by? They're funded by government. They're funded by each of the non-governmental organizations that are also funded by a government. So it's a big circle of money kind of pooling around, and eventually the taxpayer pays for it all. But let's follow the money. Environment Climate Change Canada is the funder of many of these organizations. And for a government department spending tens of millions of dollars over budget, tens of millions of dollars more on external contracts for consultants, this is an embarrassment. This is where the money's going. It's all connected friends that are actually being paid in this process. Now, Madam Speaker, this reminds me of last summer, the Task Force for the Resilient Recovery. You know, that bold environmental initiative from summer 2020. Of course, we can't find the record of what it did or why it recommended what it did. But quite famously, 15 individuals from 15 government-funded organizations came together quickly in the midst of a pandemic to not let this opportunity pass, that's the pandemic and people dying, because thousands of people have died to allow us, them, to move their agenda forward. Scary comments. Parliament was shut down. Canadians were locked down. Were there meetings of these 15 organizations, these 15 individuals? Was there external input sought? Did the Canadian economy or Canadian society participate in this report or these meetings? Healthcare workers, teachers, businessmen, engineers, farmers, processors, technologists, workers, legalists, Indigenous organizations? No. No input whatsoever. It's actually a whitewash of one professor's academic pursuit. Stuart Elgie, Smart Prosperity Institute is the organization. One document drove it forward. Well, who are some of the other partners in this? Let me read them off, Madam Speaker. International Institute for Sustainable Development, Efficiency Canada, Transition Accelerator, Institute for Sustainable Finance, Clean Energy Canada, Environmental Defence Canada, Corporate Knights, Stockholm Environment Institute, Environment and Climate Change Canada, again, right back there funding itself, Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, Broadbent Institute, a number of other institutes that are all funded by government coming together here, all helmed by none other than Gerald Butts, that beacon of transparent democratic government. If you look closely enough at all these organizations, you will see significant overlap in boards, management, and mandate. And they love government money. So another circle of connected government-funded organizations gathered together to recommend more government spending on their initiatives. Don't look for the report, it's not available. But you can see its recommendations, sometimes word for word, and billion dollar for billion dollar in the last throne speech and in this year's budget. Government policy by highly paid, self-interested, star-chambered. Democracy under this Liberal government. Conflicts disclosed? Not at all. Bill C-12 proposes to ensconce this unaccountable, self-interested, conflicted decision-making body as an instrument in Canada's environmental decision-making. Indeed, some members of this board were involved in the Task Force for the Resilient Recovery. Thanks for the deceitful work, says the Minister of Environment. Canadians will thank you with an endless stream of unaccountable funds. So a bill, C-12, supposedly about accountability of government, is in fact a removal of accountability of government. Follow the money, Madam Speaker. The government's friends are getting more expensive. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to just say to the member, you know, Catherine Abreu was here in Nova Scotia and doing excellent work for the environment for a number of years. And when I was a MLA for 10 years, I was very impressed with her knowledge. Does he actually know what her background is, or is he just choosing her out of a hat and choosing to make fun of her for some particular reason? Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the strange question. This isn't fun. This is somebody whose name obviously might have picked out of the hat. I didn't. I'm only reporting what's been said in the paper about this person's qualifications and why this person actually stood out to be on this board. So I don't know where she comes from on that. I do know that she's been picked for a reason to be on this board. I do know what she's said in public as far as what the Canadian economy goes, and I do know that she's been involved in very much trying to end one of the economic engines of the Canadian economy without accountability, and that is what's wrong with this government, frankly, a lack of accountability. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires de l'honorable député d'Avignon, la Métis Matane, Matapédia.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie mon collègue pour son discours. Et on entend les libéraux dire qu'ils écoutent la science, qu'ils écoutent les scientifiques, qu'ils écoutent les experts, mais ils nous ont laissé que quelques heures en comité parlementaire pour entendre des témoins, pour entendre des scientifiques, des environnementalistes qui viennent nous parler du milieu, de qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire justement, pourquoi il y a une urgence climatique et pourquoi c'est important d'avoir une loi climat. Alors, c'est un petit peu particulier de les entendre dire ça. Et je sais que les conservateurs ont vraiment participé au débat. J'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce qu'ils auraient aimé voir dans le projet de loi C12 pour qu'il soit plus transparent, comme le nom du projet de loi le dit, plus contraignant, qu'il y ait vraiment une reddition de comptes pour n'importe quel gouvernement qui pourrait être en poste quand il y aurait une loi climat comme celle que C12 met en place.
Bravo.
L'honorable député de Calgary Centre.
J'apprécie la question, Madame la Présidente. Merci pour le député de Matapédia. C'est une bonne question, mais je cherche pour la raison pour le projet de loi lui-même et pourquoi est-ce qu'il est au Parlement maintenant, parce que qu'est-ce qui est dans le projet de loi maintenant? Je ne sais pas pourquoi il est dans le Parlement, parce qu'il n'accomplit rien pour l'environnement. Mais d'après moi, je pense qu'on fasse des choses pour l'environnement qui fassent mieux pour nous autres, pour la compagnie dans l'avenir. Merci beaucoup.
Questions and comments. We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Hamilton Centre, thank you.
Hamilton Centre, sorry.
That's okay. Very proudly from Hamilton Centre, although the member from Hamilton Mountain is a stalwart New Democrat as well. Madam Speaker, one of my favorite points of entertainment in this House of Commons has been watching the member from Calgary Centre argue with the Minister of Natural Resources about which party is more committed to oil and gas, and yet in the honourable member's comments he talked about accountability. So this bill would work to establish an advisory board, which he referenced, that was supposed to have a mandate for review of the government's progress. So specifically, which measures of accountability would this member like to see to ensure that the industry is held accountable for climate change?
The honourable member for Calgary Centre has 1 minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a very good question. I really appreciate it. The accountability is about the whole country being accountable, including the oil and gas industry. So I do appreciate the member's question, particularly as it relates to the Minister of the Natural Resources on the other side of the House. We do need to actually set targets here. We do need to actually enforce targets, and regulatory targets about how we're actually going to reduce carbonization in our economy going forward here, which applies to all industries. The thing about our natural resource industry, it has been the most successful at decarbonizing so far, and we need to continue on that trend. One company in my riding reduced its carbon footprint by 18% over the past 4 years. Significant progress. Show me another company in this country, another industry, where we're reducing our carbon footprint by 4.5% a year. And we will all be successful in this effort, Madam Chairman. Thank you.